So I did a video early December about exciting new fragrances coming out, and one of the fragrances I discussed in that video was the new Drakkar Intense, which should be launching very, very soon. So I thought I'd put together a separate video on the anticipation for this new Drakkar flanker, Drakkar Intense, which launches 50 years after the original Drakkar, not even the Drakkar Noir. But 50 years later, we're going to get a Drakkar Intense. Plus, in this video, I'm going to review Drakkar Noir, this one of my favorite fragrances from the 80s. I wore actually 4 bottles of this in the 80s. Plus, I'm going to, discuss a few of the other flankers that have come out throughout the years for Drakkar, and then some alternatives of Drakkar Noir. So, find out all about Drakkar Intense, Drakkar Noir, additional flankers, and then of course some alternatives of Drakkar Noir, all coming right up. Thanks so much for tuning in. This is Sebastian. Yes, today I'm talking about Drakkar Intense, which should be landing very, very soon. I'm very, very excited for Drakkar Intense. I was such a huge fan of this Drakkar Noir, very much a big fan of it, and Drakkar Intense launches 50 years after the original Drakkar, which came out in 1972, and then they launched in 82 Drakkar Noir. I never got to sample the original Drakkar, or maybe I did, I just don't remember ever, but it was all about Drakkar Noir for me. As soon as I saw this bottle, I was 12 years old when this first came out, and I had to get a bottle, so probably 2 years after I started wearing this when I was around 12 years old, because I was already like sneaking sprays from Dad all the time, his Polo, his Aramis, and all that stuff, his Halstons. But this one came out during my teens, and I wore it during my teens, and I wore about 4 bottles of it. So it just has a lot of meaning for me. It's a very iconic fragrance. The bottle is very, very, I don't know, it's one of the most amazing bottles for me in fragrances. It's just totally, the visual of this fragrance is absolutely amazing. So I'm very excited for the launch of the Drakkar Intense. I'm counting down the days. I don't even know when. Probably sometime in February, I'm thinking this is going to launch. And the price point is actually pretty good. Anyway, as I said, it is all about Drakkar Intense, a full review of Drakkar Noir, the timeline of all the Drakkar flankers, and then some additional alternatives for Drakkar Noir. Before I get to those though, if this is your first time tuning into the channel and you still haven't subscribed, please click the subscribe button and also click the bell so that you'll be notified for future videos and giveaways. So Drakkar Intense I heard about last November, so I did that initial video in a collection of fragrances I'm anticipating. If you haven't caught that video, please go catch it. But yes, I've been excited for this launch a lot because it sounds like it's going to be going back to the roots of the original fragrance. I'm not sure if it's going back to the roots of this, but definitely the original Drakkar, and I believe Drakkar Noir was definitely a flanker of the original Guy Laroche Drakkar. So it's the one that I remember and wore, as I said. But this particular fragrance comes out 50 years after the original Drakkar, and then 40 years after Drakkar Noir. So according to my notes, it comes in eau de parfum concentration, and it's 50 ml for 58, 100 ml for 77. I could not find a perfumer mentioned for this particular fragrance, but that sounds pretty exciting. The price point is pretty nice. I believe it's priced low because it is inspiration of something that's classic and not very popular. But for notes in Drakkar Intense, for top you've got bergamot, absinthe, coriander, rosemary. Heart notes features lavender, clary sage, juniper berry. Finally, base notes patchouli, vanilla, suede, and moss. So this sounds really, really exciting to me. Again, it's a designer. It's going to be all under IFRA and everything. There's no mention of oak. Well, there is mention of Oakmoss, but I think these days they're not using the real stuff, where they're kind of like, cheating us with Oakmoss potentially, but it's minute amounts, but the patchouli is amped up, and I believe you can do trickery with patchouli in the place of Oakmoss. But either way, I like the idea of this one. Absinthe sounds great in a fragrance. Rarely you see coriander in men's fragrances these days. It's a classic note for me. And then of course you've got the lavender, the signature aromatics in here, and the spices, and then the addition of vanilla, so to sweeten it up a little bit, and that suede leather. I think it sounds like a solid fragrance fragrance. Visually, the bottle looks great. It's not the dark bottle, it's the clear bottle, because the original was a clear bottle, the one that launched in 72, but the juice color seems quite nice, all dark ambery orange. So this is very, very exciting for me. Let me know if you guys are excited for Drakkar Intense. Have you worn Drakkar Noir? Because I don't see Drakkar in the original Drakkar anywhere, and I'm just not remembering if I ever got to sample the original Drakkar, because I think I went straight to Drakkar Noir, but I might have sampled it here and there somewhere, but I'm just not remembering it. But that should come out very soon, as I said. But let's go back to the timeline of all the launches. So the original, as I said, came out in 72, which is 50 years ago. The Noir, Drakkar Noir, in 82, and I wore 4 bottles of this, as I said. I wore 4 bottles of this starting at around 84, and then all the way through probably the early 90s, like 91, maybe even into 92. But the majority of the time I wore it in the 80s, and I was obsessed with it. And even as a kid, I wore fragrances so much, and fragrances back then were so much stronger. So imagine me spraying like 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 sprays of Drakkar Noir and walking around with all this like Aromatic Fougere fragrance like projecting and off of me, and me leaving this kind of like massive sillage everywhere I went. So yeah, this fragrance is quite phenomenal. It's very, very it means a lot to me, because it is one of those first fragrances that, after sampling all of Dad's fragrances and Uncle's fragrances, me having my own fragrance, this was my signature. I mean, I don't really believe in signature fragrances now because I have so much fragrances, but if you're one that has just 1 or 2 fragrances, that's what I had. I had 1 or 2 fragrances, and it was my signature fragrance for years. But you know, I did dabble into other fragrances here and there, but I wore this one quite a bit. So this one came out in 82, 40 years ago. And then Drakkar Dynamik came out in 99. This one I completely missed or ignored, because at 99 I was obsessed with you know, things like Angel, Dolce & Gabbana Pour Homme, Versace Dreamer, Boss Bottled. Those are the fragrances I wore back then, and I kind of thought, you know what, I'm over Drakkar. I don't need another fragrance. And it seems like this particular Dynamik, Drakkar Dynamik, was probably the weakest. Although I did sample Drakkar Essence, which launched in 2014. It wasn't a wow fragrance for me, so I skipped it. But I think both Dynamik and Essence are still available at discounters. You can pick them up. But I don't think I could find Drakkar, the original from 72, anywhere. So why is Drakkar Noir such a special fragrance for me? I think it basically screams 80s. It's got that whole 80s vibe going for it. Not only this particular fragrance, but you smelled a lot of fragrances that smelled similar to this, but also distantly related to this, because they were doing a lot of aromatic fougères. It was a very, very popular style for men. And that's what this fragrance is all about. It's an aromatic fougère. I bought this 200 ml bottle in 2020, at the height of the pandemic. I found a deal online and I had to get it. I just wanted to kind of revisit some classics, and I'm glad I did, because the current formulation, whatever I got in 2020, still smells great. Yes, it's thinner, a lot thinner than what it used to be, because it was a lot more beast back then. It was very thick, dense, heavy, but still, it still smells great. It really does. And any of you that like you know, classic fragrances, you know, powerhouses from the 80s and things like that, definitely should get a bottle if you can afford a bottle, because these are the kind of fragrances that men were wearing back then. Not much now though. But this one is an aromatic fougere and obviously features loads of lavender with Oakmoss, but it also has pine needles, some mint, bergamot, coriander, wormwood, juniper, lemons, rosemary, verbena, patchouli, and angelica. It's a who's who of aromatic herbal notes and spices, you know, lots of them, and some woods thrown in, of course the Oakmoss and the pine and things like that. And it still smells today, it still really, really smells great. For me, it's a very, very herbal experience. It's an herb garden explosion. You get to experience the lavender, get to experience all the pininess and the mintiness. Those are all very, very prominent, and the blend is just perfect. It's perfect, and it actually, when I wore this one, I wore it to high school, I wore it to junior high, and I smelled great. I just loved it. And the thing is, back then, fragrances like this, back in the 80s, you'd wash your hands if you had anything sprayed on it. You'd still smell it. You'd wash it again. You'd still smell it. And then once again, finally, you'd wash it again way at the end of the day, and that stuff still lingered on. This is pretty weak, but as a smell, I think it still smells great. But I absolutely love the whole green, woody, aromatic, herbal, spicy composition. I think it's one of the best fragrances ever created for men, in my book. Not only because I love the way it smells, but I wore it. It has a lot of meaning for me. And so I think it deserves the attention. So that's why I'm looking forward to the Intense, the Drakkar Intense. And again, it's inspired by the original, most likely the original Drakkar, not the Noir. But it's all in the same family under the same brand name of Guy Laroche. Anyway, that's my thoughts on this one. As a current formulation from 2020, I bought this in 2020. I think it was Fragrance Net, somewhere like that, which I always tend to go to. I think it's a very... you can experience the thinness, so it doesn't have greatest longevity, and I usually don't dig into that kind of stuff because most people experience fragrances differently. I wear a lot of fragrance, so fragrances are kind of weak to me. You might wear fragrances not as much as I do, so fragrances, even thin fragrances, can come off very dense and heavy to you. But as far as a fragrance wearer goes, this is pretty thin. I'm assuming it's somewhere around 4 to 5 hours approximately, if that, with this particular fragrance. But it's just a great fragrance to have, to remember the 80s by, you know, with just a really great fragrance to have. So that's Drakkar Noir. A little about Dynamik, which I don't know much about, but it did come out in 1999, and as I said, there are some stock out there. But to me, it seems like kind of like a metallic, aromatic, ambery green fragrance. I don't know if you know this particular version. If you've worn it, let me know. And do you recommend, if you have it, a complete blind buy of Dynamik, Drakkar Dynamik, of this particular fragrance? I don't think I ever smelled it. I could have smelled it because I always visited fragrance stores or departments in department stores. So I might have smelled it in passing, but I never bought it. But the Drakkar Essence, I remember a little more, and I remember it being a little on the aquatic aromatic kind of leaning. So if you guys think Drakkar Essence is worth it, let me know. I'm collecting fragrances to build out the library here, so having that particular fragrance, if it's an okay fragrance, supposedly it's created by Michel Girard, who I think is a fairly decent perfumer. But let me know if you guys think that having Drakkar Essence would be worth owning. So anyway, those are those fragrances, and now on to the alternatives to Drakkar Noir. So the first alternative I'm going to talk to you about is from the house of DIPTYQUE. It's Eau de Menthe, launched in 2019. As soon as I put my nose on it, instantly I thought of Drakkar Noir. In fact, some ladies have said it reminds them too much of their dad or grandpa, and they don't like it. It's a unisex fragrance. It does lean masculine to me because it does have that aromatic fougere reminder. But for me, this particular version, the DIPTYQUE version from 2019, is a rosy take on like an aromatic fougere Drakkar Noir style fragrance. For me, when I'm comparing them side by side, the rose totally stands out on this one. But when I wear it separately without ever smelling this, it smells like Drakkar Noir to me because the rose doesn't stand out for some reason. But since my nose has gotten so used to this and I spray this one, the rose totally stands out. So if you like the idea of an aromatic fougere Drakkar Noir-esque fragrance but with a rosy take on it, that's what I would recommend as a great alternative. So that is DIPTYQUE's Eau de Menthe. The next one is Rogue Perfumery's Bon Monsieur. And this one actually I kept coming back to. Originally I thought this is kind of like a indie take on like a Tom Ford Beau de Jour fragrance, but I kept smelling or getting hints of something like Drakkar Noir, lots of it. But for me, the Drakkar Noir reminder for Bon Monsieur is up top, and it's kind of like dries down to smelling more like Beau de Jour after that reminder of Drakkar Noir is gone. So another great alternative would be Bon Monsieur from the house of Rogue Perfumery. I think this is a great house, and if you like the idea of a fragrance reminding you of both Drakkar Noir and also Beau de Jour, then definitely check out Bon Monsieur from the house of Rogue Perfumery. Now I'm going to move on to also one more fragrance from the house of HOUBIGANT, Duc de Vervins. This is an eau de toilette version which launched in '85, so it came out 3 years after Drakkar Noir did. So from a classic house of HOUBIGANT, and HOUBIGANT is known for one of the very first fougères, launched in the late 1800s, HOUBIGANT's Fougere Royale. Different fougères for sure. To me, this is more of the Drakkar Noir-esque fougere, and then HOUBIGANT's Fougere Royale, which nowadays we have the 2010 version, which is the more modern version of a fougere, is so different. This is definitely the 80s fougere experience. But this one to me seems a little deeper and slightly metallic take on this particular aromatic fougere. And for me, when I get a lot of aromatic notes, when you put them together with some citruses, and of course, if not all the time, but sometimes with juniper, if there's a juniper note, or geranium, they tend to kind of go screechy a little bit, a little metallic. Whereas it doesn't happen here. This is more of the herbal, weedy kind of variety. For me, in this one, it does go a little shiny, kind of metallic experience. So other than that, it smells very similar to the Drakkar Noir, but you have those differences of reminding you of some metallic touches, a little screechy, and sharpness comes in as well. So that's the difference between this one and this one, the Duc de Vervins versus Drakkar Noir for me. And again, these are all great alternatives. You might like one over the other, you might like all of them. So if you're a fan of Drakkar Noir and you want some alternatives, definitely check these out. So a couple more alternatives, and these are two cheapies. I mean, Drakkar Noir is already a cheapie, so these could be additional alternatives. This is Geoffrey Beane's Bowling Green, this one right here. This came out in 1986, so 4 years after Drakkar Noir. But this is also a great version of Drakkar Noir, and I think for me, it's more like an invigorating, lemony, citrusy take on Drakkar Noir. So it's very, very fresh, and it's got it's very vibrant. It's got lots of vibrancy, but it's weird. It starts out like that, this freshness, and it kind of settles a little dusty, sandy on me with this particular one. But still a great fragrance. If you like Drakkar Noir, definitely sample this one. They're not identical, but they hint at one another, because I hadn't smelled this for a long time, and I did a blind buy just last year, and I got it, and immediately I thought to myself, that's like Drakkar Noir's cousin. So Bowling Green is great. But it's funny about that fragrance. When I was looking for it on FragranceNet, it said it's sold out, and I thought to myself, oh man, is it completely gone? Is it discontinued? I ordered a couple off of Amazon for about 45 bucks each, but now I see that FragranceNet has brought more back, and it's around $25–30 for that. Still very, very inexpensive. The last fragrance I'm going to talk to you about, I bought and spoke a lot about on the previous channel. This is from a house called COFINLUXE. This is Taxi, a fragrance created by Mark Buxton, who has his own lines, and he does a lot of fragrances nowadays, and then also launched in 1984, so 2 years after this one. So my bottle is from around 2012. It smells really, really great. It reminds me of Drakkar, but for me it's a little sweeter and a little darker than Drakkar Noir, but totally it reminds me of Drakkar Noir. So you can get this for about 10 to 15 bucks. It's very, very inexpensive, and I think it's a great alternative. But if you have Drakkar Noir, you probably don't need any of these. If you're obsessed with aromatic fougères, definitely sample them. And of course, if you have the money, the extra money, and you can afford an extra 15 bucks, definitely try Taxi by COFINLUXE. Anyway, those are my thoughts about these fragrances. I'm really, really excited for Drakkar Intense. I can't wait. It's got a great price point, great looking bottle, great color juice. I'm excited, and as soon as I get it, I'll report back on the channel. But let me know if you guys are excited for Drakkar Intense. Let me know what you think of these alternatives to Drakkar Noir, and did you wear Drakkar Noir like I did in the 80s? Anyway guys, thanks so much for watching today's video. If you have any questions or comments, please list below. Please like this video, please share it, follow me on Instagram and Facebook, and I'll be back with more videos very soon. Have a good one. Goodbye.